The wind tore through Springfield, Illinois on that crisp October afternoon, clawing at Freya Jensen's scarf like it could unravel the secrets she'd buried deep. She was 16, a tangle of quiet dreams and sharp edges, the kind of girl who scribbled wild plans in a dog-eared notebook stashed under her pillow, plans for a life bigger than this sleepy town. The park's old oak trees blazed gold and red, their fiery canopy casting a fleeting glow of invincibility. Beside her, Owen Carter flashed that grin, the one that melted ice in January, the one that hooked her heart 2 years ago when he kicked a soccer ball her way in gym class and called her the prettiest goalie he'd ever seen. They'd been stitched together ever since. Late-night talks on her porch swing, stolen kisses behind the bleachers, dreams spilling over like soda from a shaken can. Freya saw a future in his hazel eyes, a beat-up apartment in some loud electric city, Chicago, maybe New York, walls plastered with their ambitions. Hers to write stories that cut deep, his to build something unstoppable, a business with his name in neon. "We'll ditch this nowhere hole," he'd vowed last spring, sprawled on her bedroom floor, grease-stained pizza box between them. "You and me, Frey, nothing's gonna stop us." But today, the air felt wrong. Owen's steps crunched too fast on the gravel path, his hands jammed into his blue varsity jacket, shoulders hunched against more than the wind. Freya's stomach knotted, cold and tight. "Hey," she said, brushing dark hair from her eyes, her voice teasing to mask the dread. "You gonna spill what's eating you, or do I have to guess? You've been a ghost all week." He stopped under the biggest oak, its gnarled branches clawing the sky. The world held its breath. "Freya, we need to talk," Owen said, his tone clipped, final, a door slamming shut. He wouldn't look at her, just kicked a pebble with his sneaker, eyes glued to the ground. Her heart thudded. "Is something wrong?" She stepped closer, searching for the boy who'd traced constellations on her palm last summer, fireflies flickering around them. "You're scaring me." "Look," he said, finally glancing up, but those hazel eyes she'd loved were ice now, a stranger's stare. "This," he waved a hand between them, sharp and vague. "Our relationship. It doesn't fit anymore. I've got plans, big ones. College apps, Georgetown, Stanford. I'm chasing a career, and it's holding me back." Freya blinked, his words slashing through her like a rusted blade. "Holding you back?" she echoed, voice trembling despite her fight to keep it steady. "I thought we were in this together. You said we'd figure it out. College, life, everything." "I know what I said," Owen snapped, jaw tight, "but I've made up my mind. It's better this way, for both of us." He turned, his jacket a shrinking blue blur down the path. Something glinted on the gravel, a thin silver bracelet she'd made him last Christmas, etched with their initials. He'd left it like trash. Freya snatched it up, fingers shaking, and hurled it into the bushes, the metal clinking against the oak as her sobs broke free. He didn't glance back, not once. The wind howled louder, tugging her scarf loose, but she barely felt it. Her chest caved, a hollow ache swallowing her whole as she stood there, rooted, watching the boy she'd built her world around vanish into the rust-colored dusk. How could he toss their dreams aside like they were nothing? Like she was nothing? For a long time she stayed, the crunch of leaves fading to silence, her heart scattered like the debris at her feet. But that heartbreak was just the first fracture. Weeks later, the real storm hit. The signs had crept up, missed periods, a stomach that churned at her mom's morning coffee. Whispers at school had already started. Owen's girl, knocked up and dumped, sticking like gum to her sneakers. Freya slipped out one gray November afternoon, hood up against the drizzle, and snagged a pregnancy test from the corner drugstore. She locked herself in the upstairs bathroom of her family's tidy suburban house, heart hammering as she waited, the plastic stick trembling in her hand. Two pink lines glared back, a neon scream she couldn't dodge. Pregnant. At 16. Alone. She sat at the scratched-up kitchen table that night, the test shoved into her sweatshirt pocket, its edges digging into her palm like a guilty shard. The air smelled of meatloaf and gravy, a Tuesday ritual as steady as the clock's tick. Her mom, Ellen, bustled in, apron streaked with flour, calling, "Freya, dinner's ready. Come on, it's getting cold." Her dad, Paul, sat at the head, glasses slipping down his nose as he skimmed the Riverside Gazette, oblivious to the bomb ticking in her chest. "Mom, Dad," Freya mumbled, hovering by her chair, voice thin as a fraying thread. "I need to talk to you." Paul folded the paper with a rustle, peering over his glasses. "What's this about, huh? You look like you've seen a ghost." Ellen froze mid-scoop, gravy dripping onto the tablecloth, eyes darting over Freya's pale face. "Freya, honey, what's wrong?" Her chest squeezed, breath hitching. "I'm pregnant," she choked out, the words splintering as they hit the air. Silence crashed like a guillotine. The spoon clattered to the floor, splattering gravy across the linoleum. Ellen's hand flew to her throat, a strangled gasp escaping. Paul's face flared from pink to boiling red, veins bulging at his temples. The newspaper hit the table with a smack. "Pregnant?" Ellen shrieked, fumbling for the napkin in her apron, twisting it into knots. "Freya Marie, you disgrace us. How could you be so stupid, so reckless? What's everyone gonna say?" "Hold on, Ellen," Paul cut in, voice low and lethal as he shoved his chair back with a screech. He loomed over them, fists clenched. "You're telling me you've gone and ruined your life. And ours. Who's the father? That Owen kid who's been sniffing around." Freya flinched, tears stinging her eyes. "It's complicated. He's gone, Dad, but I can handle this, I swear. I'll figure it out." "Handle it?" Ellen snapped, her voice climbing to a hysterical pitch. "You're 17. You think you can just figure out a baby? What about school? What about us? The neighbors will talk. The church will talk." "I didn't mean for this to happen," Freya shot back, gripping the table's edge as her voice cracked. "You think I wanted this? I'm scared too, but I'm not running away from it." Paul's laugh was a bitter bark. "Scared? You should be. You've got no idea what you've done." He jabbed a finger at her, eyes blazing. "This isn't some little mistake you can fix with an apology. You're not raising a kid under my roof. End of story." "Paul, don't," Ellen started, but he whirled on her. "Don't what, Ellen? Coddle her? She's thrown everything we gave her back in our faces." He turned to Freya, voice steel. "You want to play grown-up? Fine. Handle it somewhere else. Get out." Freya's tears broke free, streaming down her face. "You're kicking me out? Just like that? I'm still your daughter." A memory flashed, Dad lifting her onto his shoulders at the county fair, Mom laughing as they shared cotton candy. That girl was gone now, replaced by this stranger they couldn't even look at. "Not right now, you're not," he growled, stomping toward the living room, his footsteps shaking the floor. "You made your bed. Lie in it." She stumbled to her room, his get out ringing like a gunshot in her skull. Her mom's sobs faded to a dull hum downstairs. Freya yanked her duffel from under the bed, hands shaking as she stuffed it with sweaters, jeans, that damn notebook full of dreams now taunting her. The glow in the dark stars on her ceiling stared down, mocking the girl she'd been. Fear clawed at her, fear of the unknown, of the life inside her, of being utterly alone. But alone wasn't the end. Not yet. There was one place, one person, who might still open a door when the world slammed them shut. Grandma Elena, 2 hours away, in a sagging brick house with a garden that bloomed even in winter. "You're always welcome here, kid," Her gravelly voice had crackled over the phone last Christmas. Always. Freya zipped the bag shut, snatched a photo of her and Owen from her desk, grinning at the fair, his arm around her, and shoved it into the side pocket, a bitter shard of trust's cost. She stepped onto the porch, the January air slapping her face, snow dusting the lawn under the streetlight's pale glow. Her breath fogged as she glanced back at the warm windows, her mom's silhouette hunched at the table, and turned toward the bus stop. Where she was going, she didn't know. But one thing burned clear. This wasn't the end of Freya Jensen. It was the start of something no one, not Owen, not her parents, could have predicted. And whatever came next, she'd face it with teeth bared. The Greyhound bus screeched to a stop just past midnight, its brakes hissing like a beast spitting out its last breath. Freya Jensen stepped onto the frost-crusted pavement of the Springfield station lot, her sneakers crunching ice, the duffel strap cutting into her shoulder like a lifeline she couldn't release. The 2-hour ride had been a blur, headlights slashing the dark, Owen's retreating jacket flickering in her mind, her dad's barked, "Get out," hammering her skull like a relentless drum. Her breath fogged in the frigid air as she trudged 3 blocks to Elena's street, the cold sinking its claws deeper with every step, her swollen belly a quiet, insistent weight beneath her coat. The little brick house rose into view, its sagging porch bathed in the sway of a lone yellow bulb. Winter roses pierced the snow in the garden, stubborn blooms clawing through the freeze, a defiance Freya envied. Before she could knock, the door swung wide, and there stood Grandma Elena, wrapped in a faded quilted robe, silver hair yanked into a messy bun, her sharp gray eyes flicking over Freya's tear-streaked face. A shadow crossed those eyes, a fleeting darkness hinting at battles Freya couldn't name. But Elena said nothing, just stepped forward and pulled her into a hug. Her arms were sturdy as oak, belying the frail hunch of her shoulders, and Freya felt the first crack in her armor give way. "Come on in, dear," Elena said, her voice rough yet warm like gravel smoothed by years of wear. "There's always a place for you here. You know that." Freya nodded against her grandmother's shoulder, words trapped behind the lump in her throat. Elena didn't pry, didn't judge, just ushered her inside, the door creaking shut behind them. The house smelled of aged wood and chamomile tea, a faint whiff of cinnamon lingering from some long-cooled oven magic. It was small, cluttered with decades of life. A sagging plaid couch patched with duct tape, a shelf of chipped teacups, a radio humming low with late-night jazz. Elena nudged her toward the living room. "Sit, warm up. I'll fix us something hot." Freya sank into the couch, springs groaning under her, clutching her duffel like it might keep her from sinking into the void. Elena shuffled back with 2 steaming mugs of tea and a plate of meatloaf sandwiches, crusty bread, a smear of ketchup, the kind of comfort that hit like a memory she hadn't known she'd lost. They ate in silence at first, the clink of forks slicing through the stillness, but the weight of it all, the fight, the fear, the baby, pressed too hard. Freya's walls shattered. "Grandma," she started, setting her mug down with a shaky clatter. "I messed up everything." The words tumbled out, raw and jagged as broken glass. "Mom and Dad kicked me out. Mom said I've disgraced them, that I'm not their daughter anymore, and I'm—" She swallowed hard, tears spilling over. "I'm pregnant. I don't know what to do. I'm so scared." Elena set her own mug down, slow and deliberate, her weathered hands steady as stone. She let out a long, heavy sigh, one that carried echoes of old scars, nights of raising Paul through lean years she never spoke of, a past locked behind her sharp gaze like a vault Freya couldn't crack. Leaning forward, she fixed Freya with eyes like steel. "Oh, child," she said, patting Freya's shoulder, her touch firm but tender. People spew all kinds of venom when they're hurt or mad. I've heard worse, lived worse. But listen to me. A child's no disgrace. It's a blessing every damn time, even when it cuts deep. Freya sniffled, wiping her nose on her sleeve. They don't see it that way. Dad told me to get out, like I'm some stranger off the street. And Owen? He's gone. Doesn't even know. How am I supposed to do this alone? You're not alone, Elena cut in, her tone sharp as a blade through Freya's spiral. You've got me, don't you? I raised your daddy through times so thin we ate hope for supper and patched our shoes with dreams. I'll help you through this too. We'll manage. Always have. But what if I can't? Freya whispered, her voice trembling like a leaf in the wind. What if I'm not strong enough? Elena chuckled, a low, raspy sound that rattled her chest, and squeezed Freya's shoulder harder. Strong enough? Girl, you walked out of that house, belly and all, and dragged yourself here through the snow. That's more spine than most muster in a lifetime. You'll figure it out, one step at a damn time. Now finish that sandwich before it gets cold. Freya managed a watery smile, the first shard of light piercing her drowning dark. She picked up the sandwich, its warmth seeping into her chilled fingers, and took a bite. Elena leaned back in her chair, sipping tea as the jazz crooned softly, a fragile peace settling between them. For the first time in weeks, hope flickered. A small, stubborn flame, like those roses clawing through the snow outside. The months stitched a brittle rhythm into Elena's house. Freya knelt beside her grandmother in the garden, tending the winter roses, their thorns pricking her fingers, a quiet lesson in fighting through pain. She'd curl up on the couch with mugs of chamomile, the radio's hum sewing her frayed edges back together. Her belly swelled, her fears gnawed like rats in the dark, but Elena's gruff assurances kept her tethered. We'll manage, kid, she'd say, chopping onions for stew or patching a hole in Freya's jeans with threadbare precision. Always do. To keep the lights on, Freya took a job at Rosie's Diner, a squat, grease-stained joint on the edge of town, its cracked vinyl booths and busted jukebox stuck in a Nixon-era time warp. She waited tables, sneakers squeaking on the linoleum, balancing trays of burgers and coffee as her belly grew rounder. The tips were meager, pennies and crumpled fives, but she stuffed every cent into a dented coffee can under her bed, scrawled baby's future in black Sharpie. Dreams of nursing school danced in her head some nights, but she'd shelved them. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about the life kicking inside her, the one she'd claw through hell to protect. The diner was her battlefield. One night, a drunk regular grabbed her wrist as she cleared his table, his breath sour with whiskey. Pretty thing like you shouldn't be hauling trays with a belly like that, he slurred, his grip tightening. Freya yanked free, heart slamming against her ribs, and Rosie, a wiry woman with a smoker's rasp, barked him out the door, her voice a whip crack. Hands off my girl, you pig. The guy stumbled off, but the shame clung to Freya like damp smoke, a bitter taste she couldn't rinse away. She worked doubles anyway, her back screaming, exhaustion carving lines into her young face. Rosie let her nap in the back office between shifts, a second-hand car seat stashed for when the baby came. You're a tough one, kid, Rosie said once, flicking ash out back. Mosted buckle. Freya just shrugged, too tired to argue. Buckling wasn't an option. Not now, not ever. Then came that muggy Tuesday in mid-August, the air thick with heat and the buzz of restless cicadas. Freya was rinsing dishes in Elena's cramped kitchen, suds dripping onto the worn linoleum, when a sharp pang doubled her over. She clutched the sink, gasping, "Grandma!" as the pain ripped through her like a jagged blade. Elena tossed a dish towel aside, snatching the keys from the hook. "Let's go, girl," she said, her voice steady as steel. "Time to meet this little fighter." They sped to Springfield Mercy, a small hospital off the highway, its beige walls and buzzing fluorescence blurring as Freya gripped Elena's arm through the first waves of agony. Hours stretched into a haze, contractions tearing cries from her throat, sweat blinding her eyes. The pain peaked, a white-hot surge that broke her. "I can't do this," she screamed, her voice raw, hands clawing the bed rails. Elena gripped her hand, her weathered fingers a lifeline. "You can, girl," she barked, fierce through the chaos. "You've carried him this far. Don't you dare stop now." Freya pushed, a final roar splitting her soul, and then he was there, a tiny boy, slick and squalling, his dark, fluffy hair glistening under the harsh lights. The nurse laid him on Freya's chest, and time slammed to a halt. She stared at his scrunched face, his impossibly small fists, her heart cracking wide with a joy so fierce it stole her breath. His skin warmed hers, his chest rising and falling like a promise etched in blood. She cradled him, arms trembling as if letting go might unravel this miracle. "You're my joy," she whispered, tears thick in her throat, brushing a finger over the tiny hand that latched onto hers with startling strength. "My secret." Elena leaned over the bed, her lined face softening into a rare, wide grin. "Look at that," she said, voice husky with pride. "A fighter, just like his mama. What a head of hair on him." "He's perfect, isn't he?" Freya said, her laugh shaky but real, glancing up at her grandmother through blurry eyes. "Perfect as they come," Elena agreed, resting a hand on Freya's shoulder. "You did good, kid. Damn good." The room settled into a quiet hum, beeping monitors, Soren's soft whimpers, the distant chatter of nurses down the hall. Freya traced the curve of his cheek, memorizing every flutter of his lashes, every purse of his lips, like he was already dreaming. She'd been terrified of this moment, terrified of failing him, of the jagged road ahead. But now, holding him, she felt something stronger take root. Not just fear, but fire. For him. For them. "Think he's hungry?" Elena asked, nodding at the way Soren's mouth rooted against Freya's chest. "Maybe," Freya said, shifting him gently, still marveling at how fragile he felt in her arms. "Guess we'll figure it out together, huh, little man?" Elena chuckled, pulling a chair closer, her cane tapping the floor. "That's the spirit. You two will be just fine. I've got a hunch about it." Freya smiled, exhaustion tugging at her edges, but Soren's weight kept her tethered. For the first time since that night on the porch, she believed it might be true. But this was only the start. The world outside those hospital walls had teeth, sharp, hungry ones, and it was waiting to bite. Harder than she could imagine. The years wove themselves into the fabric of Elena's little brick house like threads in a patchwork quilt, each season stitching Freya Jensen and her son, Soren, tighter into its weathered embrace. That muggy August night when Soren burst into the world had shifted everything. Freya's trembling hands had hardened into resolve, her fear forging a fire that burned brighter with every cry from his tiny lungs. She'd named him Soren, meaning light, in some old Norse tale she'd found in a library book, because that's what he was, a beacon slicing through the dark she'd once drowned in. In the quiet hum of Elena's home, that light grew, wild, fierce, unstoppable. By 5, Soren was a whirlwind of wiry limbs and bright hazel eyes. Owen's eyes, Freya couldn't deny, though she'd buried that ghost under years of grit. His dark, tousled mop caught the sunlight as he darted through the garden, chasing answers to questions that never quit. "Mama? Why do birds sing?" he'd ask, sprawled on the sagging porch steps, a half-melted popsicle dripping orange onto his fingers. "How do clouds float?" Freya would pause, dish towel slung over her shoulder, tossing out guesses. Birds sing to talk, buddy. Clouds? They're light, like cotton candy in the sky. He'd scrunch his nose, unsatisfied, and scamper to Elena, who'd grumble, "Ask the wind, kid. It knows more than me." They marveled at him together, his endless curiosity, the way his small frame seemed too fragile for such a racing mind. The house bent to his chaos. The plaid couch became a fort for his library books, pages smudged with tiny fingerprints. The kitchen table a lab for dismantled toys, flashlights, a busted radio, anything he could crack open to see its guts. In first grade, a bully smashed his flashlight project, laughing, "Egghead's toys trash now." Soren didn't cry, just rebuilt it overnight, smaller, brighter, and showed it off in class, chin high. Freya found the broken pieces in his backpack later, her heart twisting at his quiet defiance, a spark she'd lit, now burning on its own. She worked her shifts at Rosie's diner, the coffee can under her bed, growing heavier with every tip, every double she pulled. It wasn't glamour, her sneakers still squeaked, her apron sagged, but it was steady. It was theirs. Elena was the rock beneath it all. Nearing 80, she dodged the question with a smirk. Her hands were gnarled from decades of hard living, but her spirit was steel. She'd shuffle to the garden in her quilted robe, pruning those winter roses with a focus that shut out the world, or sit in her wicker rocker, knitting lumpy scarves she swore had character. "Your daddy got his stubborn streak from me," she'd told Freya once, her gray eyes glinting. "But you got the fight, and then some." That fight kept Freya standing, though the bruises lingered. Her parents' rejection was a dull ache she'd learned to carry, a scar she'd walled off with silence, no calls, no letters, just a void they couldn't breach. Elena was her bridge, Soren her proof that love could outlast fear. But the world had a way of testing that proof, and one sticky summer evening, it cracked open a seam. They were on the veranda, the old boards creaking underfoot. Elena rocked in her chair, knitting a lumpy blue scarf, while Soren sprawled on the steps, popsicle stick in hand, the sun dipping low to paint the garden in gold and pink. He'd been quiet, unusual for him, until he turned those big, serious eyes on Elena. "Grandma," he said, cutting through the dusk's hum, "why do all the kids at kindergarten have grandpas and grandmas, and I've never seen mine? Mama says you're my great-grandma. What's that mean?" Elena's needles stilled, yarn tangling in her lap. She'd known this day would come. Kids always sniffed out the gaps, but the weight caught her off guard. She set the scarf aside, folding her hands to buy a moment, her weathered fingers tracing lines of a life she rarely shared. Soren watched, popsicle forgotten, brow furrowing like he sensed the shift. "Soren," she started, voice soft but steady, "that's a big question for a little guy. It's a grown-up mess, but I'll try. Sometimes adults make mistakes, huge ones. Your grandpa and grandma, my son and his wife, they got scared a long time ago when your mama was having you." He tilted his head, confusion wrinkling his nose. "Scared of me? I was just a baby when I got born. How could they be scared of a baby?" Elena chuckled faintly, though her chest tightened. "Not of you, little man. It's hard to explain till you're bigger, but they couldn't see how special it was, how special you'd be. They got stuck fretting over what folks might whisper instead of how much your mama wanted you." Soren's frown deepened, his small hands balling into fists. "So they didn't want me?" His voice wobbled, barely a whisper, and the hurt in it sliced through her like a knife. "No, no, darling," Elena said, quick, leaning forward to cup his sticky cheek. "That's not true, not for a second. They just didn't know how to handle their mess. People can be slow, and sometimes they miss the good stuff till it's gone. But your mama, she chose love from the jump, chose you. That's what counts. He stared at her, processing, then turned his gaze to the garden. The last rays glinted off the marigolds, winter roses swapped for summer blooms, and a breeze carried the faint buzz of a lawnmower. "But you're here," he said finally, glancing back, a spark flickering in his eyes. "You're always with me, right, Grandma?" "Always, my dear," Elena replied, her smile crinkling her eyes. She ruffled his hair. "Family's not just who you're born to, it's who sticks by you through the thick of it. And I ain't going anywhere." Soren grinned, gap-toothed and bright. "Good, 'cause I like it better with you anyway." Elena laughed, low and warm, picking up her knitting. "Me too, kiddo." The rocker creaked as she settled back, the evening wrapping them in a patched quilt, imperfect, but holding fast. Freya stood at the kitchen sink, hands deep in soapy water, scrubbing a pot that didn't need it. Through the open window, Soren's voice and Elena's gravelly replies drifted in on the warm breeze. She caught the tail. "They didn't want me." And her breath hitched, the sponge slipping to plop into the suds. Tears welled, hot and sudden, spilling down her cheeks. She pressed a damp hand to her mouth, stifling a sob as that old wound, her parents' rejection, ripped open. Hearing Soren wrestle with it tore at her, but Elena's steady words wove a balm, softening the edges as always. "Mom?" Soren's voice piped up from the doorway, snapping her back. He padded in, barefoot and sticky-fingered, still clutching that popsicle stick. "You okay? Your eyes are all wet." Freya swiped her face with a dish towel, forcing a smile. "Yeah, buddy, I'm fine. Just got soap in my eyes. Stings like crazy." She turned back to the sink, rinsing the pot again. "How's Grandma's scarf coming?" "It's lumpy," he giggled, hopping onto a stool. "She says it's character. I think it's funny looking." "Sounds like Grandma," Freya said, her laugh shaky but real. She glanced out the window, Elena rocking, needles clicking, and gratitude rushed in. Soren chattered on about a beetle in the garden, anchoring her to the now. But the now wasn't done throwing punches. Weeks later, on a muggy Thursday in late spring, Freya was mid-shift at Rosie's, refilling a trucker's coffee, when exhaustion slammed her like a freight train. Soren's fever the night before had kept her pacing, and the diner's fluorescent buzz drilled into her skull. Her foot caught a chair leg, and she stumbled, the pot tipping. Hot coffee splashed across a table in a dark, steaming arc, soaking papers, a phone, and the lap of a man in a crisp navy suit that screamed money. A woman at the table shrieked, "This is designer, you idiot," as coffee hit her purse, and the diner went quiet, all eyes on Freya's fumble, her cheeks flaming. "Oh my God," she gasped, the pot clattering down as she snatched napkins from her apron. "I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't mean—" She dabbed at the mess, words tumbling. "I'll clean it up. I'll pay for it." The man brushed coffee off his sleeve, frowning, jaw tight. 40-ish, sharp cheekbones, dark hair graying at the temples. She braced for a tirade, but he locked cool blue eyes on her, silencing her babble. "Dry cleaning's fine," he said, voice low and clipped. "But I've got a meeting in an hour. Fix this. Bring me something to wear till it's done." Freya blinked, panic spiking. "Something to wear? Okay. 20 minutes. She bolted to the kitchen, dodging a busboy, and begged Rosie for a break. "Emergency. I'll be back." Rosie grunted assent, and Freya sprinted 4 blocks home, sweat sticking her shirt to her back. She burst into Elena's house, Soren at school, Elena napping, and raided the closet, shoving past mothballed coats to grab Grandpa Earl's old corduroy jacket, a brown relic from the 70s, patched and smelling of pipe tobacco. Back at the diner, panting, she thrust it at the man. "Here, not fancy, but clean." He eyed it, the faded fabric, frayed cuffs, and burst out laughing, a deep, rolling sound that cut through the diner's hush. Freya froze, then cracked a nervous grin. It's, vintage. Vintage, he echoed, still chuckling as he shrugged it on, the jacket clashing wildly with his slacks. Name's Lance. You've got guts. I'll give you that. Freya, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. And I'm really sorry about the suit. Lance waved it off, adjusting the jacket. Meeting starting. We'll settle up later. He grabbed his soggy briefcase and headed to a booth, where Rosie slid in across from him. Freya hovered by the counter, pretending to wipe it, catching snippets. Prime location, development deal, firm offer. Out back, Rosie lit a cigarette and spilled it. Guy's a land shark. Been sniffing around this plot for months. Wants to bulldoze us for some condo crap. Freya's stomach sank. Rosie's wasn't just her job, it was her lifeline, the backbone of that coffee can. If Lance bought it out, those years of pennies might vanish. She watched him leave, corduroy swapped for his cleaned suit, and wondered, who was this guy, and what game was he playing with her world? His easy grin unsettled her. Too smooth, too perfect. Was he here for her, or the diner? Trust was a thread she couldn't pull without unraveling herself. Time sank its roots deep into Springfield's soil, and Freya Jensen's life blossomed wilder than she'd ever dared dream. Soren grew like a flame catching dry tinder. By second grade, he was the kid who lingered after class, peppering Mrs. Larson with questions that left her laughing and shaking her head. Why do leaves turn red? How do magnets stick? Science was his kingdom. Biology, physics, anything with a puzzle to unravel hooked him hard. He'd come home with library books spilling from his backpack, sprawling on Elena's living room rug to sketch circuits or bug wings, his hazel eyes, Owen's eyes, blazing with a quiet, fierce focus that mirrored the defiance he'd shown rebuilding that broken flashlight years ago. He's got a gift, Mrs. Larson told Freya one parent-teacher night, her glasses glinting under the school's fluorescent lights. Loves solving problems, finds these clever little fixes that make you wonder why you didn't see it. Half the class gets it because he explains it better than me. Freya beamed, clutching a styrofoam cup of lukewarm coffee, pride swelling in her chest. He's always been like that, she said, figuring stuff out. Keeps me on my toes. Mrs. Larson chuckled. Hang on to that, hun. Kids going places, big places. Back home, Soren proved it daily. One rainy afternoon, he sat cross-legged at the kitchen table, a dismantled flashlight spread before him, batteries, bulb, wires, like a surgeon mid-operation. Look, Mom, he called, holding up a glowing contraption. Timmy didn't get how it worked, so I rebuilt it to show him. It's just electrons moving. Simple, right? Freya leaned over, ruffling his hair. Simple for you, maybe. I'd have shocked myself silly. He grinned, gap-toothed, and bright. You'll teach me something one day, huh? She teased. Only if you stop burning toast, he shot back, and she swatted him with a dish towel, their laughter bouncing off the walls. Watching him grow, his quick mind, his steady grit, eased the ache of those early years. Her parents' rejection lingered, a bruise she'd learned to live with, but Soren's light outshone it. He was her proof that love could build something stronger than fear ever tore down. And then there was Lance. That coffee-soaked chaos at Rosie's had sparked something Freya hadn't seen coming. Lance kept showing up, weekly, then twice, each time with a small, deliberate move. Daisies from the market, tickets to a matinee at the old theater downtown. Her walls, built high after Owen, cracked under his dry humor and quiet stubbornness. She'd catch herself lingering over coffee with him, laughing at his tales of botched real estate deals. But trust was a tangle. His easy grin, too smooth, too perfect, unsettled her. She'd caught him once, sketching something on a napkin at the diner, crumpling it when she walked up. Was he here for her, or the land Rosie's sat on. He'd hinted at a past, divorced, no kids, lines around his sharp blue eyes, but never the full story. One night, over beers, he'd let slip, lost a kid before it was born, never got over it. Freya saw it then, a wound he carried, a ghost he might be chasing through her son. Then came the bombshell. 6 months after that first diner dinner turned routine, spring bloomed wild across Springfield, lilacs thick in the air. They were on Elena's veranda, Soren inside tinkering with a robotics kit Lance had gifted him. A bribe, Freya half-joked. Lance had been fidgety, twisting his coffee mug until he set it down and took her hand. Her heart thudded. She knew that look, the one that upended her world. "Freya," he said, voice low and sure, "I want to marry you. Spend my life with you, Soren. All of it. What do you say?" She stared, the words ricocheting in her skull. Marriage? Her? The diner girl with a kid and a coffee can dream? Lance was a storm she hadn't dared imagine. Steady, kind, a man who laughed at her sharp edges and stayed anyway. Sometimes, lying awake beside him, she'd pinch herself, half convinced he'd vanish. But there he was, real as the calluses on his hands, blue eyes searching hers. "You're serious?" she whispered more to herself. "Dead serious," he said, squeezing her fingers. "You in?" Her throat tightened, a yes trembling, but years of caution held it back. "Let me think on it," she managed, and he nodded, unfazed, like he'd wait forever if she asked. Days later, he upped the stakes. He'd nudged her before about quitting Rosie's, joining his firm for admin work. "You'd be great," he'd said over takeout, but she dug in. "Rosie's is mine, my lifeline. Soren's college fund depends on it." He'd shrugged it off, or so she thought. A week after the proposal, he showed up with a thick envelope and a grin that wouldn't quit. Elena was peeling carrots, Soren sketching gears on the rug. Lance plopped the envelope on the table. "Open it." Freya frowned, sliding out papers. Her eyes snagged on Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. Soren Jensen, full tuition scholarship, pre-med program. Her breath caught. What is this?" "His spot's locked in," Lance said, laughing. "Paid up, 4 years, med school, kids set." "You what?" Freya's head snapped up. Soren perked up, wide-eyed, and Elena dropped her peeler with a clatter. "Been working it for months," Lance said, still chuckling. "Connections from the firm, called in a favor. He's in, starts in 9 years when he's ready." "Stop laughing," Freya snapped, voice cracking, tears pricking. "Lance, this is how—" She bolted to her room, grabbed the coffee can, Soren's future, half full of crumpled bills, and dumped it on the table. "Take it then. You paid for this, not me." Lance pushed the money back, his laugh softening. "That's yours. I did this because I wanted to, not for a refund." Soren piped up, "Does this mean I'm going to be a doctor?" Elena cackled, clapping, and the room spun with their voices. Freya's mind raced. Days later, she pulled those savings, every penny from 15 years, and ordered a custom jacket, navy wool, tailored sharp like Lance's suits, with a corduroy collar nodding to that chaotic first day. She wrapped it in a sleek black box, tied with silver ribbon, and waited. The moment came one quiet evening at Rosie's after closing, just them in a booth under a flickering light. She slid the box across. "Open it." Lance raised an eyebrow, peeling back the ribbon. He lifted the jacket, his grin fading to something softer. "Freya, this is for you," she cut in, voice thick. "For showing up, for Soren, for everything. I was terrified to let anyone in, but you're real. Thank you." He ran a hand over the collar, eyes bright. "So that's a yes?" She laughed, a tear slipping free. "Yeah, Lance, it's a yes." He pulled her into a hug, the jacket squashed between them, and for once, Freya let the warmth flood her chest unchecked. 20 years had passed since that frigid night on her parents' porch, and Freya's world was a tapestry of scars and triumphs. Soren sailed through Johns Hopkins like he was born for it, acing exams with quiet ease, his curiosity lighting up operating rooms. At 22, he was a surgeon in Baltimore, steady hands wielding a scalpel in high-stakes chaos. Freya, now 42, managed Rosie's with Lance, her husband since that spring night, after buying it from Rosie. Elena, 90 and counting, still ruled the brick house with her sharp tongue and sharper eyes. It was late November, Thanksgiving week, when the storm hit. Soren was home, the house glowing warm against the gray dusk. Freya had cooked a feast, turkey with sage stuffing, mashed potatoes drowning in gravy, when a call from the clinic cut through. "Emergency surgery," Soren said, grabbing his coat. "Save me some pie." The operation was brutal. 6 hours. A woman in her late 60s with a ruptured appendix. Soren pulled it off, steady as steel, and she came through groggy but alive. He was scrubbing out, still in green scrubs, when her husband approached. A wiry man, balding, in a tweed coat, his handshake lingering. "Doctor, Jensen, thank you," he said, voice thick. "You saved her. I can't—" "Just doing my job," Soren said, peeling off gloves, ready to crash. But the man hovered, eyes darting over Soren's face. "You're young for a surgeon. Springfield, right? Parents still there?" Soren frowned, tossing the gloves. Yeah. Mom's there. Why?" The man smiled, tight and odd. "Just curious. Good stock, raising a kid like you. What's your mom's name?" "Freya," Soren said, wary now. "Look, I'm glad she's okay, but I need to meet her," the man cut in, stepping closer, voice dropping. "The woman who raised a surgeon this bright. I have to thank her." Soren blinked, thrown. "That's nice, but it's not a thing we do. She's busy." "I mean it," the man pressed, eyes locked on Soren's. "Please." The insistence prickled Soren's neck. He forced a smile. "Maybe someday. Take care." He turned for the lounge, but the stare bored into him. Later, on a cot, it clicked. That wasn't just gratitude. It was searching. Weeks later, the man, Paul, tracked Soren down, relentless with calls. "I'd really like to meet your mom, just once." Soren, patience frayed, relented. "Fine. Quick visit." December came, a warm snap melting the frost. Soren drove to the brick house, Lance on the porch swing, Freya squealing over the phone about strangers driving hours to thank her son. Paul and Ellen trailed in a battered pickup. Freya burst out, apron dusted with flour, grinning, until they climbed out. Him in that tweed coat, her in a faded cardigan. Her smile vanished, face slack with shock. "Mom, you okay?" Soren jogged to her side. She nodded too fast, tears glistening. "Fine, honey. Everything's fine." Her voice wobbled. He frowned, glancing between her and the couple. "Do you know them?" She swallowed, tears spilling. "Soren," she said, barely audible. "Meet your grandparents." The air sucked out of the yard. Ellen burst into sobs, hands flying to her mouth. Paul dropped to his knees in the gravel, slacks tearing. "I'll beg if I have to, Freya." Ellen clutched his arm, sobbing, and Freya froze, the sight a punch to her gut. Too much, too late. "I'm so sorry," Paul rasped, shaking, tears streaking his face. "I've missed you every damn day. We were fools, scared, stupid. I want to fix it, please." Ellen hiccuped. "We were wrong, Freya." "So sorry. Your boy. He's incredible. A surgeon, saving lives. My grandson. I hate that we missed it." Soren's brain stalled. "Grandparents?" He faced Paul, voice shaking. "You didn't want me then. Why should I care now?" His hands balled into fists, the scalpel-steady surgeon unraveling into the boy who'd once asked why. Freya stood silent, hands clenched, tears drying into steel. Paul turned to Soren, voice thick. "Grandson, we're family. You've got to know that." Soren's arm tightened around Freya, jaw set. "My family's here. Mom, Dad, Grandma. That's who raised me. But Mom's call. If she says you stay, you stay." Paul nodded, gravel biting his knees. "Ellen's sick, appendix ruptured. Soren saved her last month. We didn't know it was him till after. We came to thank him and find you." Freya's breath hitched, eyes blazing. "You needed him to save her. That's why you're here. Not just sorry. Survival." "No," Paul pleaded. "It's not like that. Yes, he saved her, but we've been lost without you. Seeing what you've built, what Soren's become, it's a wake-up call. We want to make it right." Ellen reached out, trembling. "Please, Freya. We failed you. Let us try. For Soren, if not us." Freya's chest heaved, 20 years crashing in. The frigid porch, the duffel, the sting of get out. She looked at Soren, her anchor, Lance, her rock, Elena, her shield. This was her family, chosen, forged, unbreakable. She took a breath, voice cold but firm. "Soren's surgery wasn't forgiveness. I'll let him decide what he does with you. For me? Sorry's a start, not enough. You can come in, see what I've made without you. But this is mine. I decide who stays." Paul rose, wiping his face. "Fair enough. We'll take what you give." Ellen murmured a choked, "Thank you." And they shuffled toward the door, diminished against the life they'd lost. The old brick house stood unyielding against the December dusk, its warm glow spilling onto the snow-dusted lawn as Freya Jensen led Paul and Ellen inside. The air was thick with sage stuffing and firewood, a sanctuary she'd carved from 2 decades of scars and triumphs. Soren trailed her, hands shoved into his coat pockets, hazel eyes hard with the same wariness she felt. Lance stepped off the porch swing, his graying hair catching the light, closing his dog-eared copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, a ritual he'd started when Elena's eyes began to blur. Elena shuffled out in slippers, leaning on her cane, her sharp gaze cutting through the tension like a honed blade. Freya's voice was ice as she gestured to the couple. "Lance, these are my parents, Paul and Ellen." Lance stood, offering a handshake, firm and neutral. "Paul, Ellen," he said, nodding, his gray eyes sizing them up like a map he'd only heard whispers of. No warmth, no judgment, just a steady watchfulness. They settled into an uneasy circle. Freya and Soren on the couch, Lance by Elena's armchair, Paul and Ellen perched on the love seat's edge, looking like they might bolt. Silence stretched, heavy as the steam curling from the teapot Freya set on the coffee table. Cups clinked, spoons stirred, but no one spoke until Elena's voice sliced through, frail yet fierce as ever. "Paul," she said, eyes snapping open, pinning her son where he sat. "I hoped you'd come to your daughter with an apology years ago. Decades I waited, thought maybe I'd raised you better than this." Paul flinched, setting his cup down too hard, tea sloshing over the rim. "Mom, we didn't mean to hurt her. We were scared." Elena cut him off, her tone a whip crack. "Freya was a child, 17, pregnant, alone, and you turned your backs because you couldn't face the mess. Don't tell me what you meant. Tell me what you did. Threw her out like trash while I picked up the pieces." Ellen's hands twisted in her lap, voice small. "We were always worried about her, Ma. Always." Elena scoffed, her cane tapping the floor. "Worried? You'd have worried if you'd stayed, if you'd called, visited, sent a damn dime for that boy. But you didn't. You left her to me, and she built a life anyway, a damn good one. Raised a son who saves lives, married a man who'd walk through fire for her." She swept a trembling hand across the room. "This family, it's hers. And there's no place for you in it till you own what you threw away." Paul's face crumpled, tears pooling. "We were wrong, Mom. I know it. We both do. We just didn't know how to fix it." Ellen nodded, sobbing quietly. "We're so sorry, Freya. We don't deserve anything, but we're here now." Freya sat rigid, staring at the steam rising from her untouched tea. Soren's hand rested on her shoulder, steady as steel, while Lance watched, waiting for her lead. The room held its breath, Elena's words a verdict carved in stone. Freya had cut them off clean after that January night, blocked calls, returned letters, built a fortress they couldn't breach. Paul and Ellen had only gotten scraps through Elena's grudging updates. Freya's at the diner. Soren's born, healthy boy. She's fine now, standing here. They were strangers with her eyes, her blood, begging for a crack in the wall she'd forged. Paul cleared his throat, voice breaking. "Freya, it's not just forgiveness. Ellen's sick, appendix ruptured. Soren saved her last month. We didn't know it was him till after. We came to thank him. And to find you." Freya's head snapped up, breath hitching. Soren's grip tightened, jaw clenching as the pieces clicked. That odd hospital encounter, the man in the tweed coat, the desperate insistence. Her parents, his grandparents. She stood, hands clenched, tears drying into resolve. "You needed him to save her," she said, voice low and cutting. "That's why you're here, not just sorry, survival." Paul shook his head, desperate. "No, Freya, it's not like that. Yes, he saved her, and we're grateful. God, we are. But we've been lost without you. Seeing what you've built, what Soren's become, it's a wake-up call. We want to make it right." Ellen reached out, trembling. "Please, Freya, we know we failed you. Let us try, for Soren, if not us." Freya's chest heaved, the weight of 20 years crashing in. The frigid porch, the duffel, the sting of "get out." She glanced at Soren, her anchor, Lance, her rock, Elena, her shield. This was her family, chosen, forged, unbreakable. Could she let these ghosts back in? Did they deserve it? Before they left, she made her choice. She pulled the old photo of her and Owen from her duffel, grinning at the fair, his arm around her, faded and creased, and handed it to Paul. "This is what you missed," she said, voice steady as stone. "Take it. I don't need it anymore." Paul clutched it, tears spilling as Ellen's sobs choked the air. Freya turned to Soren, then back to them. "Soren's surgery wasn't forgiveness. He decides what he does with you. For me? Sorry's a start. Not enough. You can come in, have tea, see what I've made without you, but this," she waved at the room, "is mine. I decide who stays." Paul nodded, wiping his face with a shaky hand. "Fair enough. We'll take what you give." Ellen murmured a choked, "Thank you," and they shuffled to the table, diminished against the life they'd lost. Soren leaned close, voice low. "Mom, you sure about this?" She squeezed his hand, a silent, "We'll figure it out." "I'm not doing it for them, buddy. I'm doing it for me, for us, to show I'm bigger than their mistakes." He nodded, standing tall. "Then they're welcome, for tea. But my family's here. You, Dad, Grandma. That's what matters." As Paul and Ellen sat, Soren pulled Freya into a hug, his voice fierce. "You're my hero, Mom, not them. Never them." She buried her face in his shoulder, the boy she'd fought for now her rock, tears soaking his coat. The door creaked shut, the warm glow spilling onto the lawn as they sat. Lance resumed reading. "You never really understand a person." His voice soft, the fire crackling on, the tea growing cold. Freya watched Paul and Ellen sip in silence, their hands trembling, and felt a fragile thread, not forgiveness, not yet, but time, a chance to heal on her terms. Later that night, after they'd gone, Paul and Ellen driving off, taillights fading, Freya stood in her room, the house quiet save for Soren's tinkering downstairs and Lance's snores from the couch. She pulled the coffee can from under the bed. Soren's future, now empty, its purpose fulfilled beyond her wildest hopes. She opened her notebook, pages yellowed with dreams and scars, and wrote, "Life hands you shards, sharp, jagged, heavy, but you can take them and build a world. I did, for Soren, for me. Family isn't blood. It's who stays when the storm hits. Forgiveness isn't owed. It's earned, and I'm not there yet. But I'm strong enough to wait, to choose my light." She shut the book, slid it under the pillow, and stepped to the window. The wind howled outside, but the fire roared louder within. Soren's laughter mingled with Lance's mock groans over a busted gear. Elena's roses glowing red against the snow, defiant as ever. Freya smiled, small but fierce. The darkness had come, Owen, her parents, the cold, but she turned it into dawn, her dawn, and that was enough.